Joining me now to talk about how names like Trayvon Martin and Oscar Grant can become bywords for the killing of young black men is Maya Wiley, founder and president of the Center for Social Inclusion, and Jelani Cobb, associate professor of history at the University of Connecticut, contributor to the New Yorker's News Desk blog, where I really recommend you read what he writes because he's a phenomenal writer. So reliving through the Oscar Grant case is pretty heady as we sit here right now with 6 jurors in Florida deciding the fate of this case. And there's been a lot of the subtext, I think, as we look towards this case is what will happen if there's a not guilty. I mean, that's the elephant in the room, right? In fact, on Fox, it's not even it's not the elephant in the room, it's the elephant that they're talking about. Here's Bill O'Reilly basically sounding the alarm, warning of the unrest that will result from a not guilty verdict. Take a listen.
If the prosecution did present a weak case, and that, again, is the consensus of the media following it, even the liberal media, and he does get acquitted, Mary Catherine, I mean, are you expecting people to run out and cause trouble? So you both agree there's a possibility for damage to be done to the fabric of the nation if this verdict comes in as an acquittal.
What do you think when you hear that?
I think that we're afraid of black people. And that's the bottom line. And certainly it's a rational question in the sense that after Oscar Grant, there were riots. After Rodney King, the acquittal of the officers of Rodney King, there were riots. But that doesn't mean we always riot.
Right. I should also say about Oscar Grant, after Oscar Grant, there was massive anger, a huge peaceful mobilization in the city of Oakland, a huge peaceful mobilization, people marching. There were riots as that demonstration essentially broke up. There were about 80 people, I believe, arrested, but these were not mass riots. The vast majority of the people that came out to express their displeasure after Oscar Grant were indeed peaceful. And
remember Rika Boyd, who was shot by an off-duty police officer 2 months after Trayvon Martin. She was an innocent bystander. He was shooting at someone who was going for a cell phone. So it's a very similar kind of, someone who was not violent, hadn't done anything wrong. There were no riots after she was killed. So it's not simply that every single time. There are actually social conditions that produce violence, and it's complicated.
Yeah, I think I've been saying this all along. I think that people riot when they expect justice and they don't get it. I don't think that black people expect justice in this case. I think this is kind of
That's an incredibly intense statement.
I think it is. I think it's the kind of same scenario, different day. And looking back to Oscar Grant, not to take the focus off of that, but that happened the same month that President Obama was inaugurated, and it wasn't the only time. There were 2 other African-American men, there were 3 that same month, unarmed, who were shot by law enforcement, one in Dallas, one in New Orleans, and of course in the Bay Area with Oscar Grant. And even during the campaign, the question came up of the Sean Bell verdict, about the young man who was shot in New York City. This is not a kind of tangential thing. This is something that we're very familiar with. In the overwhelming majority of these instances, people have not rioted, and I think that people may just be depleted. I don't think that they expect things to turn out differently.
It's also that a lot of times when we see riots, we see a couple of different things. Black people have been humiliated in a variety of ways over a long period of time, either by repeated police brutality, usually coupled also with very high unemployment rates, and so it becomes the tinder, the spark that actually hits some very dry tinder and turns into a bonfire.
The other thing I keep thinking about as we await the verdict, and this is just a really important point when we talk about the fate of black men in the criminal justice system, what their lives mean to the criminal justice system when they are the victims of violence, what their lives mean to the criminal justice system when they are accused of being the perpetrators, is that we all have a tendency, because trials are fascinating, gripping things, and we cover them a lot, understandably, because they really are dramatic. 98% of what happens in this country's criminal justice system is that people are cranked through this machine in which there is no verdict, there is no big deliberations and long jury selection. It's plea, 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 plea. And you can go down to 26 in California and Chicago, as I have, and go to the courthouse there in the night shift and watch the arrestees brought in, and they are booked, and people are plead. And that is criminal justice in this country. That's the other side of it, The other side of it is a lot of young black and brown men being run through this system.
Well, it's also that we forget, we're talking about Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin. These are black men who were feared, even though they hadn't done anything in the instance in which they were killed. Our fear of them is also because we're constantly churning non-violent offenders. So what you're describing, Chris, is these aren't people who are going around and hurting people. In fact, 5 times as many whites use drugs than are arrested compared to blacks for drug use.
Well, I think the other thing too is that this is about resources. People who are kind of in this mill, being pled out and sent to sentences and so on. These are people who don't have resources, and there's a reason why George Zimmerman has the resources he does. People have been kind of his residents.
That's
They've given him hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even we saw
more than the Trayvon Martin Family's Foundation.
Maya Wiley from the Center for Social Inclusion and Jelani Cobb from the University of Connecticut. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all in for this evening. MSNBC's coverage of the George Zimmerman trial continues next.